Hey, hi, welcome. Welcome to our first live stream here on Facebook for the Winter Garden Heritage Foundation. We are going to be talking about our new exhibit called Dr. Albert Gleason, West Orange County's eminent physician. And we have a special guest with us tonight, Frances Gleason Grubbs, Dr. Gleason's daughter. I just want to thank you for supplying all the information and items that you did. They really have helped with this exhibit.
You're welcome.
And we hope we did justice to your father. Whenever I do an exhibit about a certain individual in town, I always feel so much closer to him or her because of all the items that we get and all the information from the family. Because that's what this is basically all about here in Winter Garden, families and connections and generations. Can you tell us a little about how he came to settle in Winter Garden, if you have that information generally?
After he graduated from medical school from Hahnemann, he went to work in New Jersey. His uncle had an uncle that lived there, and a couple of the people that he was working with found out that there were jobs in Florida. So he up and came with them, and they ended up, his first job was in Perry, Florida, I believe. He worked for a Dr. Baker there, and I don't know that he was there very long, because after a while he ended up in Umatilla with the Umatilla Children's Home that he worked for there, and began his practice in Eustis and West Orlando at Orange Memorial and at Florida Sand in Orlando, and he made those rounds pretty much every day. He lived in Umatilla. Yeah, it was a hike. He lived in Umatilla with his mother, who he brought down from New York because she had breast cancer. And he lived there with her. This was all before he was married and before the war. When he went off to war, he had just married my mother, and he went off as a flight surgeon stationed in England, and was there until, I guess, around 1943 when he came back. My oldest sister was born while he was gone. When he came back, he came back to Eustis, and that's where he did the rounds every day of the 3 hospitals, and lived in a small house in Oakland, Florida, where I was
right
born, and my brother and my second sister were born. She was born right after we moved to Winter Garden, but we lived out in Oakland, right next to the church, in a small house there, and that's where we got to know Dewey Matthews so well.
Sure.
You know, she became our surrogate mother, really. Yeah. And so I think probably what encouraged him, to get busy on getting a hospital brought to Winter Garden is I think he got tired of that trip every day. And so they moved to Winter Garden, built the house there, which he lived in until he passed away, and started working with other people in the community to get the hospital built back in those days. So that's kind of how he got here.
Yeah, it's
and he never left.
It's quite a legacy. Yeah. You mentioned when he was up in Perry, in the Perry area, there's a little community on the map named Scanlon, which is the name of a doctor that he worked with here in Winter Garden. I wondered if there was a connection.
I don't know if there was a connection to that. I would have to look that up, because when you mentioned Scanlon, that's the first time I'd heard of the community even being called Scanlon. I always was told Perry. Yeah. And he worked for Dr. Baker. But I do have a good friend, Mary Scanlon, who is Dr. Scanlon's daughter, who lives in Gotham. And I'd like to get a hold of Mary and see if she knows if there was any.
She can shed light on that.
She might shed light on that. I don't really know about that.
So he drove. You mentioned going up to Sanford, up in Seminole County from down here. He did a lot of house calls.
He did house calls everywhere.
Yeah. Tell us how he got paid for his services sometimes.
Oh, well, you've got a little book over there. Oh, you're talking about the chickens.
The chickens.
When he was in Perry, when he first got to Perry, the very first day he worked for Dr. Baker. Dr. Baker worked for the sawmill, paper mill that was there, but he also had a lot of patients that he did house calls on back in those days too. And he told Dad that he needed him to go out and see this particular patient, this lady. And so Dad did. He got in the car and went out like he told him to. He was living with Dr. Baker at the time. He had rented a room in his house from him and was living with Dr. Baker. So he goes out and he takes care of the lady. And when he gets ready to leave, she said, you know, doctor, I don't have any money. I can't pay you. But Dr. Baker, he always takes a chicken. And Dad said, oh, no, that's okay. You know, that's fine. Don't, you know, he didn't want part of that chicken. Well, the lady insisted and put the chicken in the trunk of the car. And when he got back to the office, the first thing Dr. Baker said to him was, well, Doc, did you get the chicken? And he said, when we sat down to dinner that night, we had fried chicken.
That's very good.
That was his first pay, was that chicken. And we, over the years, I can't tell you how many times we would come home and there were vegetables and all kinds of things sitting at our doorstep. That was how people paid.
Yeah, from grateful people, sure. They wouldn't
Great
just
food,
expect
too.
service for nothing, yeah.
Yeah.
And that kind of goes along with what I've always heard about him. He'd go visit anyone, he'd go anywhere, and regardless of race, creed, color, he just treated everyone equally.
Yes.
And I find it interesting that when they opened the new hospital that he had such a big hand in, there was, even in times of segregation, there was still a wing for African American patients. They could go to the hospital here in Winter Garden. It was just where they lived. And I think that's great. I think that had a lot to do with his approach to patients. Yeah. Some of the equipment for the hospital he bought from a former hospital. I think somebody had mentioned
A lot of
to
it,
me.
I think, was stuff that had been left over from the war.
Okay.
And it was all in a warehouse somewhere in Jacksonville. And somehow he got wind of this. So when they were building the hospital, he said, we don't have to buy this stuff. We can just, it's free. We just go get it.
Is that like some of these items here that we see?
That particular item, probably not. That particular item, you know, was one of his originals that he had up in the black building and everything. Most of the things in the hospital were more like
Cabinet,
that kind of
cabinetware.
you know, he had a lot of that kind of stuff,
Okay.
and I think the beds were more of that kind, not the.
Yeah.
But I don't know. I don't remember. I was little.
Yeah. Well, this is way before your time.
Way
You
before
probably
my
don't
time.
remember the machine
That again,
in action.
that again was a used machine that he bought from somebody.
Basal metabolic rate machine. Yeah. I love the way it works. Apparently people would blow into this end and the bellows would open and move this little needle, which was dipped in red ink in this little bottle, and it would trace your air pressure path, which told you something about a thyroid. A lot of information. I need to find out much more about that, but I think that's basically how it worked.
Wow.
Yeah. Was there was the ether distribution machine in the office?
Yes.
I remember, yeah. There's a couple of
And then
couple of older folks that I know mentioned. Oh yeah, I know that machine. Yeah.
That was
It's amazing that we have all of this. Yeah. You know, the examination table. I might have told you. We had a older gentleman visiting once, and he couldn't believe that the little marks on the edge of the vinyl were made by him. He'd forgotten. But when he saw those marks on the edge of the vinyl, he says, yeah, I was having a procedure, and the doctor told me, just hold on tight to the side of the bed. And he said, I made those little marks with my fingernails. And it was many years ago, this gentleman, but it just tied it to that table. You know, what stories that table could tell. Yeah. Wow. And it's, I think Julie Jackson Butler and Kay Kappelman rescued or brought this from the office when they closed the office, and he went to the, So we're lucky to
he
have all
sold
of
the
this
office to
equipment.
the Baptist church. I mean to the Methodist church.
Methodist church.
So the Kappelmans, you know, knew a lot about the stuff that was in it, being from Dad. So I'm sure that Kay took care of that.
Yeah, that was
What
great.
was left.
And it's wonderful to just recreate the office and, you know, the space. I find it's really interesting that there weren't a lot of Catholic folks in the area, and there was a need for a parish. Population was growing. There was a large Hispanic community growing, and Dr. Gleason was instrumental also in creating a Catholic parish?
Well, again, I think that was out of need. Every Sunday we would have to drive all the way to St. James in downtown Orlando to go to Mass, and we always tried to get there for the at least the noon Mass, if not the 11 o'clock Mass. They had them every hour on the hour back then. And I think he simply got tired of, he would go, every morning he would go to the hospital to do his rounds. And then we were told, you know, be ready to go to Mass at a certain time, so we'd have time to get to Orlando to go to Mass. I can tell you another story one time. You know, everyone thinks, well, he's just such a kind and generous man. He was very kind and generous. But like I said, we were told to be ready to go to church. Well, one day my brother and I, we must have been about 10, 11 years old, maybe, decided that we didn't want to go to church. And we were going to run away. So we wouldn't be there when, you know. So we got on our skates and off we went. Well, I looked around. I was heading down toward Lake Apopka on our skates, and I looked around and saw the car coming, and I thought, oh no, we're going to get caught. And I said, Tommy, I'm going back home because we're going to get in trouble. And he says, well, I'm not. I'm going. And he took off. Well, I went around the block, went home, put on every crinoline I owned, every crinoline my sister owned, because I knew I was in trouble. So I had and he went down and he got Tommy and brought him home. And we didn't get to Mass on time that day because the both of us were in a little bit of trouble. And we didn't forget about that after many years. We still remember that.
This didn't happen again, huh?
Well, not exactly like that, but I got into it another time, out of a lake one time. So, again, but Father Dolan was a priest that was at Bishop Moore at the time, he would come out here and say Mass in Dad's office, because there was only about 4 or 5 families.
This was the office on Boyd Street?
On Boyd Street. There was the Bretts, and the Pounds from Ocoee were about, you know, and our car pooled to school every day. So he would say Mass in Dad's office. Well, we finally got a little bit too big for Dad's office. And so we went down to Tanner Auditorium down, and we had Masses, and Father Dolan would come there and say Masses on Sunday and then we got a little bit too big for that.
Wow.
So that's when we decided, Dad worked with Father Dolan and the bishop to build our church out on Highway 50.
That was the first church building.
That was the first church building out here, yeah. Now they had built St. Andrew's in Pine Hills by that time, and sometimes we would go there, but most of the time we were right here after we started the one in Dad's office.
Wow. And that eventually got replaced by the big church
the
building
big church,
down
the Resurrection.
Down Main
It's on
Winter Garden
Vineland Road.
Yeah, yeah, that's a nice parish. You know, we have a panel showing your mom and dad being blessed by Dr. Dolan at a 50th anniversary
That was
Mass
the
that they
50th
had.
anniversary Mass.
That's
right.
great.
Right.
Yeah. Quite an
It's their
occasion.
50th.
And you're the daughter, small city, Winter Garden. What was it like growing up as a doctor's daughter in mid-century Winter Garden?
I don't remember it being any different than anybody else. We were just all kids and friends, and just in a small town. You know, it was a small enough town that you could do pretty much anything as a kid. You could go out and play. In fact, Gertrude, the lady that stayed with us and took care of us during the day and cooked our meals and everything, she get out of here. But we knew when the whistle rang at noon, we better be there for lunch if we wanted to eat. And then we knew we better be home by the time the sun went down.
Yeah.
But we rode our bikes and all over town. There's a story of I guess the older ones riding their bikes, and Catherine, who was the baby, decided that she wanted to go too, and she only could ride a tricycle. but she rode her tricycle from Dad's house, from our house, all the way up, and Davis Pharmacy people saw her in the middle of the road, because back then we didn't have a trail, we had railroad tracks, and she was in the middle of the road, and they went and got her, sat her down and gave her an ice cream cone, and called the office and said, Georgia, we have Catherine up here.
Wow.
She took her trip on her tricycle. So, you know, we're a small town where, you know, you didn't have to worry about the kids because everybody watched everybody's kids.
That's nice,
you know?
yeah.
And it's a good thing because we were all over the place.
Yeah, I believe it. And thank you, by the way, for the donation of your high school cheerleader outfits.
Oh, geez.
Yep.
Yeah, I'm the only
Those
one
are
that got
great.
to go to public school. Well, now my brother went to public school for a couple of years, but we all went to St. James School through the 8th grade.
Downtown Orlando, sure,
And down
Catholic
in
school,
and my
right.
older sister and I lived with my grandmother, who lived right behind what is now Howard Middle School, which was Orlando High School. We lived with her. Barbara went to Bishop Moore through high school. I went to Bishop Moore through the 9th grade. And then Barbara went off to college, and it was like, uh-oh, how are we going to get Francis to school? Because I didn't drive, I wasn't old enough to drive. So I begged them to let me come to Lakeview. Because I had a lot of friends in Winter Garden. I wanted to go with my, and they finally, you know, let me, but if you don't do good, you're going right back. And I said, okay. So I did all right.
Good parents, very good parents. This is what I'm getting from all this, that they were just good people. Cared about the community, cared about their kids,
Well,
they did right.
Right.
Yeah, exactly.
It was his commitment to see that we got a good Catholic education, and
Yeah,
that was
that's great.
Mother's job, was to take us over there every day and make sure we got it. So,
Very nice.
you know, that's what he did.
Yeah. What a legacy he's left with the new church as well. He's really put his stamp on Winter Garden.
Right,
Definitely.
he has, they named the hall that is out back of the church, the big hall, that's Gleason Hall.
Ah, yes.
And he was really proud of that because he
Yes.
thought a lot, you know, he thought a lot of the church.
Yeah. Is there anything else you'd like to add about Dad that we might not have covered or that has come to mind? Any other stories?
You know, Winter Garden was his life, and medicine was his life. He hated the day. He kind of came out of it a little bit at a time. I think he was like, 89 or 90 years old when he came home one day and said, that's it, I'm not operating anymore. He was a surgeon.
Wow.
And we all went, huh? And he said, I can't stand that long. I can't stand that long. So he didn't do a whole lot of surgery after that. Maybe some little ones, but not much. And then when he kept practicing in the office and everything, but when he finally sold his practice and he really was, he just, he kept his prescription thing so he could write prescriptions for people, because he would tell the story of when he got to the country club, some of the boys needed some medicine, so he had to have that ready to go. But he finally gave that up, and he looked at my husband and myself one day and he said, well, I'm not a doctor anymore. And it really, really bothered him. I mean, he just was so down because he just didn't feel like, I said, you're a doctor till the day you die, whether you're practicing or not, and he, you know, but it was his life. That's all he ever did. You know, he got up every morning, made rounds, went to the office, stayed there till he saw everybody that needed to be seen. Sometimes it was 8:30, 9 o'clock before we sat down for dinner, because he didn't walk away from anybody, and that was what he loved doing.
Shows the way people talk about him today still.
The only day I think I ever saw him cry was the day they moved the patients and finished it at West Orange Memorial and opened Health Central. And some reporter came up to him and started asking him questions about, well, how do you feel about the transition? And it was just, he was on his way walking back from the hospital for the last time to the house. And he just broke down. He was just like, you know, everything he had lived to build, you know, was gone as far as he was concerned at that time. He got used to the new hospital and it was okay. He didn't particularly care wearing that white
Yeah,
coat.
the
And
white jacket.
The white jacket was just not his style, you know. But he did when they wanted him to. He wore it, but it wasn't his style. You know. So
I wish I could have met him.
very kind man.
Yeah.
Very kind man.
I feel like I know him after all the study. Speaking with you, it's great. And of
Well,
course,
anybody you talk to in the community that knows him, you know.
everyone has a story, or just they remember his compassion and his warmth and his kindness and his interest. Like you say, he didn't go home at 5 o'clock. If he had patience, he stayed with
In fact, one day he came up to me and he said, "I need for you to go with me." When we were little, he always wanted to know if we wanted to go to the mountain to see the birds. Well, that was just getting one of us to get in the car and ride with him to Mont Verde to see a patient. But this day he said he needed to go see Ava Walker RN because she was living over in Claremont, and he had heard that she wasn't feeling real well or doing good, and he wanted to go check on her. So we went over to her house and sat there for several hours, and he took his little, in case she needed anything, he had everything he thought she needed, and he took his satchel, and we went and visited with her, and he took care of her, did whatever that she needed and everything. But that was the very last house call he ever made. It was for Len Wright's mother.
Wow, Lynn Walker Wright.
Yep.
Yeah, she mentioned that last time we talked to her.
The last one he made.
Oh. Well, I think we have covered a lot. I think I just want to really thank you again for sharing this very personal history of your dad's life and legacy. And our friends and supporters of the Winter Garden Heritage Foundation can view the exhibit here at the Heritage Museum at 1 North Main Street by the Yellow Caboose every Friday from 11 a.m. to 3 p.m. for starters, because of the pandemic. But we will stretch those hours as we go further and safely into our future. Or you can call 407-656-3244 for an appointment more convenient to you. We're very flexible, and we really want to share this exhibit and the panels. So once again, thank you all for your interest in local history, and stay in touch with this Facebook page that you're watching for details about our November live stream event, which will highlight the work and architectural legacy of the Great Depression Mayor George Walker.
Oh.
Yeah, George Walker. We still have all his buildings in town. Programs like these that we're doing, and this is a departure for us because of the situation, they still help nourish and preserve West Orange County history for both natives and newcomers. So consider becoming a member, which helps us to present history in an engaging, informative way. It's a big help. We have all kinds of levels. You can write museum@wghf.org or call me at 407-656-3244. Thank you all for your support. I will see you in the neighborhood. Thank you again, Frances.
You're very
much
welcome.
appreciated.